I'm Rachel Monroe, 34, and tonight, I'm standing outside my childhood home, only I wasn't invited in. I thought maybe this year they'd remember how much I meant to Grandma, but even after she left me, everything they still saw me as the mistake who left. They asked me to drop the house key and leave, while the others toasted inside. What they didn't know was I wasn't just passing through. The casserole had just started to brown when I caught my reflection in the oven door. I barely recognized myself, my hair pinned too tightly, the apron too pristine, smile rehearsed, like I'd been cast in a role I wasn't sure I auditioned for. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was that tight-lipped kind of quiet, like a held breath before a verdict. It was my first Thanksgiving in my own home, not rented, not shared mine. And I had invited them, all of them, my parents, my sister. The same people who just months ago didn't believe I could even keep a succulent alive, let alone a mortgage. But here I was, standing barefoot in my own kitchen, a roast turkey in the oven candles lit playlist soft. Every dish on the table had a story. Grandma's green bean casserole, the rolls Mom used to make from scratch until she stopped carrying even Isabel's favorite cranberry sauce, the one she always said was too tart, but spooned onto everything anyway. I had even printed place cards, laminated them at the office printer when no one was watching. Monroe Family Thanksgiving, they read, like I could manifest a picture-perfect night through sheer will. I placed them with care, Dad at the head of the table, Mom beside him, Isabel across from me. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect warmth, but I hoped for civility, maybe even one sincere sentence. By 5:55, the pie was cooling, the wine breathing. I changed out of my flour-dusted sweater into something more polished. A navy dress I'd bought 2 years ago but never had a reason to wear. I'd always imagined I'd save it for something important. This felt like it. At exactly 6:10, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach tightened. I smoothed the tablecloth one last time before walking toward the door. The knock came light but sharp. I opened it to Isabel's silhouette framed in the porch light. She didn't say Happy Thanksgiving, just raised an eyebrow and said, "Smells ambitious." She stepped in, boots still dusted from the path, leaving faint prints on the floor I had mopped twice. Dad followed, surveying the entryway like a building inspector. "This place has good bones," he muttered, running a hand along the wall. "Almost feels like it should have stayed in the family, doesn't it?" I smiled, not because I found it funny, but because smiling felt safer than silence. "It's cozy," I said. Then came Mom last, as always. She didn't speak. Her eyes moved slowly across the mantel where I had arranged old family photos, me as a kid, us at the lake, even one of her and Dad from their 25th anniversary. Her fingers hovered over the frames but never touched them. We sat down. No one commented on the table settings. No one mentioned the effort. Isabel scrolled on her phone beneath the table. Dad stared at the hardwood floors and said, "How'd you swing this place on your salary?" I kept my voice steady. I budgeted. It's manageable. No one asked about my job. No one brought up the promotion I'd fought 3 years for. Dinner continued like that, tight smiles, shallow compliments, eyes glancing toward clocks or walls or anything but me. When I brought out the cobbler still warm from the oven, I said softly, "Homemade crust, hand-cut apples." Dad didn't look up. Mom shifted in her chair and said, "It's sweet." I wanted to believe she meant the dessert. I reached for my wine glass, but my hand paused midair. Something in the air had shifted. Not a storm, not yet, but the kind of static that makes your hair stand before lightning ever strikes. And then Dad folded his napkin. Precisely. Deliberately. He placed it next to his plate, then looked straight at me. "We've talked about it," he said. "This house should come back to the family." I blinked. Come back to the family. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. But it landed like a plate set too firmly on a glass table. Dad leaned back in his chair, folding his arms like he was settling into a business negotiation. "It's too much house for one person," he said. "And with Sloan and Isabel planning a baby next year, they'll need space." "I bought this place," I replied, still calm, "with my own money." He gave that half smile I'd known since childhood, the one that always meant, "You don't really understand, do you? We're not saying you didn't try?" Mom interjected, her voice syrupy but cold. But we all know you struggle with follow-through, Rachel. We're just thinking long-term. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity pressed against my ribs like a scream with no exit. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the melting butter pooling near the uneaten dinner rolls. You could keep the guest room, of course, Isabel added, finally looking up from her phone. Just not the master. I mean, it makes more sense for us. There it was. The decision already made. I wasn't being asked. I was being briefed. You've been living here alone for 6 months, Dad continued. That's not sustainable. I cleared my throat. It's been 11 months. And I've paid every bill. Mom reached across the table, not for my hand, but for the salt. Sweetheart, you were never meant to do this on your own. That's not a failure, it's just reality. The word failure slid across the table like a knife, not shouted, not weaponized directly, just placed in front of me with the same grace one might offer a napkin. They didn't yell, they never had to, their voices never needed to be loud to cut. I stood up slowly, collecting the plates. My fingers grazed the rim of a wine glass still half full. For a second I imagined sweeping the whole table clean with one motion, but I didn't. Instead, I walked into the kitchen and turned on the faucet. The rush of water gave me an excuse not to hear the murmurs in the dining room. Or maybe they weren't murmurs at all. Maybe they were just the sound of people moving on, making plans, right there in the home I had fought to build. Lena had once told me, silence is your sharpest tool, but only if you don't bury it. I hadn't understood it then. I was starting to now. When I returned with dessert plates, the conversation had shifted to property taxes. Dad was saying something about zoning laws. Isabel was Googling nursery color palettes. No one looked at me, not even when I placed the cobbler on the table. Mom took a spoonful, blew on it, and said, "Did you use nutmeg?" I nodded. "Too much?" she said, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin. "But the crust's better than I expected." The room felt 20 degrees colder than it had an hour ago. The fireplace crackled, but its heat stopped 3 feet short of where I sat. Dad reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is from the family lawyer," he said, sliding it across the table toward me. "Just some preliminary paperwork. No pressure tonight." I didn't touch it. Not then. Not when the dinner ended 20 minutes later with no toast, no thank you, no hug goodbye. Not when they gathered their coats and complimented each other on how grown-up Isabel sounded. Not even when Isabel leaned in to kiss my cheek air only and whispered, "Thanks for setting this up. It'll be our last small one before the real holidays start." She called it small. I stood in the doorway as they left their backs to me, footsteps fading down the path I had raked clear that morning. When the door clicked shut, I didn't move. I just stared at the empty chairs, at the envelope still sitting untouched by the gravy stain. And then I heard it, faint but distinct. A key turning in the lock. But not mine. My breath caught. That key sound, it was subtle, deliberate, and wrong. I moved quietly to the door, each step careful, controlled. The porch light was still on. Through the peephole I saw nothing. No shadow, no figure retreating. Just the stillness of the night and the wind teasing the edge of the welcome mat. When I turned the lock and opened the door, no one was there. Only the chill, and a faint set of boot prints I didn't recognize. Not the heavy square-treaded ones Dad wore. Not the slender heel indentations from Mom's shoes. These were smaller, shallower, and fresher. I stepped out, scanning the driveway. Their car was gone. The silence deepened, not heavy like before, but sharp now. Focused. I closed the door, relocked it, and turned the bolt. Then I checked the chain. Twice. When I returned to the dining room, the envelope still sat there untouched. The flicker of the candles cast its shadow across the linen tablecloth. I slid it closer and stared at the flap. No part of me wanted to open it. But I did. Inside, a draft transfer of ownership drawn up by their lawyer. A conditional proposal for shared interest in the property. With a handwritten note from Mom at the bottom. "This is what's best for everyone. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. No signature, no warmth, just ink and pressure." I folded the papers back without reading the rest. My hands were steady. I cleaned up slowly stacked dishes, packed leftovers, wiped counters, the mundane things that grounded me when the air turned too thin. At 11:42 p.m., I sat on the couch with my phone in one hand and the bank's app open. I stared at the screen thumb hovering over the Contact Us tab, but I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled to a photo I had taken the day I closed on the house, me standing on the porch keys in hand sun in my eyes. I looked tired, but proud. Behind that smile was everything they didn't see: the hours, the saving, the sacrifices, the rejection letters, the solo apartment years, the nights I ate toast so I could pay off one more loan. I closed the app and leaned back. At midnight, the wind picked up again, whistling faintly through the kitchen window. The house creaked, settling or remembering. I pulled the throw blanket tighter around my legs. The guest bedroom door was ajar. I hadn't opened it, but I didn't get up to close it. I just sat there still. When the silence finally wrapped around me again this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like armor. The following morning, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and disappointment. I moved through it slowly, like someone walking through the remains of a party they weren't invited to, despite being the one who hosted it. The napkins were still folded neatly. The wine glasses, rinsed but not yet dried, stood like forgotten guests on the kitchen counter. In the guest room, a pillow had been nudged ever so slightly out of place, a dent I hadn't made. I paused, stared, but said nothing. Instead, I straightened it, then closed the door. At 9:04 a.m., I got a text from Isabel. "Thanks for last night. Sorry if it felt tense. Dad just wants what's best for everyone." "Talk soon, XO." No emoji could soften the dismissal in that message. I didn't respond. By noon, I was at the garden center buying poinsettias for the front porch. The cold bit through my coat, but I welcomed it. The wind on my face felt cleaner than any forced conversation I'd had the night before. Back at home, I swept the porch, rearranged the wreath, and deleted photos from my phone, screenshots of place cards, menu drafts, and table layout sketches I'd once excitedly shared with Lena. There was a knock at the door just past 2. I opened it to find my mother. No call, no warning, just her in her camel coat holding a Tupperware of something pale and steaming. "I thought you could use some soup," she said, as if that were a normal sentence between us. I stepped aside. "You didn't have to. I know," she cut in, "but you've always forgotten to eat when you're upset." I closed the door behind her. She looked around the living room, scanning the bookshelves like they held the answers she didn't want to ask. "I see you kept the painting," she said, nodding at the landscape I'd inherited from my grandmother. "Your sister thought it was outdated." I smiled slightly. "She also thinks fresh herbs are extra." Mom didn't laugh. She set the soup on the counter, adjusted her scarf, and turned to face me. "Your father's just practical," she began. "I know what he is," I replied, calmly, quietly. "He's trying to protect the family. I am family." She exhaled through her nose the way she always did when she thought I was being emotional. "You've always been so sensitive, Rachel. That's not a flaw, it just makes things harder sometimes." "I'm not sensitive," I said. "I'm just not invisible anymore." That landed. She looked down at her gloves, then at the soup, then finally met my eyes. "You don't have to prove anything to us. We already love you." I almost believed her until I remembered the envelope still sitting unopened on my desk. The legal proof of how much that love was worth. "Then why did you bring paperwork to Thanksgiving?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because we thought you might need help." I tilted my head. Did I ask for help? She didn't answer. Instead, she touched the corner of a photo frame on the mantel. It was one of me and Dad taken years ago at a science fair. I was 12, holding a certificate. He was clapping but not looking at me. His eyes were on someone off camera, probably Isabel. Mom adjusted the frame half an inch and said, "This house is beautiful. You've done well." I waited for the but. It didn't come. She picked up her purse, smoothed her coat, and said, "We'll talk more soon." I nodded. She walked to the door, paused, then added, "Don't read too much into last night." I didn't reply. She left, and this time the door clicked louder than before. By the end of the week, the envelope had migrated first to the kitchen drawer, then to the basket of unopened mail by the stairs, then finally to the fireplace mantel right beneath the Monroe family clock. I hadn't thrown it away, but I hadn't touched it again either. On Friday morning, I stopped by Lena's office. She managed a small real estate agency 2 towns over, but she'd known me since before I learned how to braid my own hair. "You want to talk business?" she said as I sat down across from her desk. "Or do you just need someone who doesn't gaslight you with pie?" I exhaled. "A little of both." She pushed a cup of peppermint tea toward me and waited. "They want the house," I said, keeping my voice even. "Not for me. For Isabel." Lena didn't flinch. "And you?" "I want to keep breathing without asking permission." "That's a start." She leaned forward, brushing her braids behind her shoulder. "Rachel, this isn't about property. This is about presence. You've built something they can't define, so now they're trying to reclaim it on their terms." I nodded, then stared down at the steam rising from the cup. "They left that envelope," I said. "Didn't even ask if I wanted to sell. Just assumed I'd fold." "You won't. I don't plan to. But they're not gonna stop." "No," Lena said, her voice firmer now, "but neither will you." That night, I pulled the curtains shut before lighting the fireplace. The house, warm and glowing, felt like mine again, until the doorbell rang. It was Isabel, wrapped in a red coat, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a small box. "I just wanted to drop this off," she said, smiling like nothing had happened. I opened the door halfway. "What is it?" She handed me the box. "It's for the baby. We found out it's a girl." I blinked. "I didn't know you were pregnant." She shrugged. "Well, it's still early, but it's happening. I didn't open the box." "Congratulations." She shifted her weight. "Look, about the house, I don't want to talk about that." "Okay, but just so you know, it wasn't a power move. It's just logistics." "Isabel," I said, calm but clear, "you're asking me to give up my home because your life is moving faster." She laughed a little. No, I'm not asking. Dad's just trying to keep things fair." My hands curled around the box she'd given me. Fair would have been letting me know before walking in with a legal draft over dessert. She bit her lip. "You've always been so formal." "I've had to be," I said. "When no one else gives you structure, you build your own." A flicker crossed her face. Not guilt, not empathy, just realization, like she was starting to see the math behind the expression. "Well," she said, turning to go, "think about it." "I have," I replied, and then before she could walk down the steps I added, "You never asked how I got the house." She paused. "I figured it was savings." "No," I said. "It was guts." She didn't reply. She walked down the steps without looking back. When I stepped inside and closed the door, I opened the box she gave me. Inside was a tiny pink onesie with gold letters that read, "Auntie Rach is my favorite." For a second, it felt like a peace offering. Then I saw the gift receipt tucked beneath it. It was dated 2 weeks ago, before Thanksgiving, before she showed up to take the house. I stared at the receipt for a long time. There was something about the date, November 10th, that made my stomach pull tight. That was the same day Dad had called and asked casually if I'd be doing anything special for the holidays. I had told him about hosting Thanksgiving in my own home. He had paused, then said, "Well, if you're offering." Now it was clear. They weren't saying yes because they respected the gesture. They were scouting the territory. The baby onesie wasn't a celebration. It was an anchor. One more thing to bind me to their version of the future, where I wasn't the homeowner, just the helpful aunt. That night I put the box away. Not in the trash, not on display, just away. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I didn't ask for clarification or apology. Instead, I started making a list. Not a list of grievances, not a speech, not a list of everything I had built in silence. The loan approval date, the inspection I passed without hiring anyone, the nights I spent repainting the baseboards because I couldn't afford a crew, the moment I read the email offering me a promotion and no one toasting to it because I hadn't told a soul. The list grew, quietly, fully. The next morning, I left a message with the bank officer who'd helped me close the deal last year. "Hi, this is Rachel Monroe. I'd like to schedule a conversation about property protection and ownership terms. Nothing urgent, just planning ahead." I ended the call with a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And then I got dressed, stepped outside, and began raking the yard. The leaves had returned, stubborn as ever, drifting back, even after being cleared the week before. As I worked, a neighbor across the street waved. "Your family gone already?" he called out. I smiled faintly. "Yes. Thanksgiving came early this year." He chuckled, not knowing the weight behind the words. I kept raking. Each scrape of metal on concrete was a reminder of presence, of ownership, of silence that didn't mean surrender. Monday came with gray skies and the kind of wind that carried memory in its folds. I sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea, staring at the wall where the envelope had once rested. I'd tucked it into a drawer, but its weight remained. Not physical, just present. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but 10 seconds later it rang again. I picked up. "Hi, is this Ms. Monroe?" "Yes, this is Jordan Lively from Chase Home Lending. Your name came up in a transfer inquiry, and I just wanted to verify, has there been any request to add co-owners to your title?" I froze. "No," I said slowly. "There hasn't." "Well," she said, and I could hear her scrolling through something on her end. "We received preliminary contact from a Mr. Daniel Monroe last Thursday. No documents submitted, but he did request a quote on joint refinancing options." I felt my stomach twist, not in fear, but in recognition. This wasn't new. This was a rhythm. They acted assumed consent and waited for me to either comply or stay silent. "Thank you for alerting me," I said, steady. "Please flag my file and note that no changes are authorized unless submitted by me in writing with notarization." "Of course," Jordan said. "Already noted." I hung up. The tea had gone cold. That afternoon I went back to Lena's office. This time I didn't sit. I handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "My proof. Every payment. Every upgrade. Copies of the deed, the inspection, the approval letters. I want to make it very clear who owns this house." Lena looked at me, then at the folder. "You're not trying to fight them," she said. "You're preparing to let them trip over the facts." Exactly. That night, I went through the guest room closet, one I hadn't opened since Isabel's last visit. There were hangers in there. Still. 3 empty ones, evenly spaced like someone had been planning to return. I took them out and laid them on the bed. Metal thin. Silent. I didn't throw them away. I mailed them to Dad. No note. No explanation. Just the 3 hangers in a padded envelope. Let him decide what that silence meant. The next morning, Mom called. I didn't answer. Then Isabel texted, "Why are you making this so dramatic? We were just trying to include you." I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I blocked her. No explanation, just the quiet press of a button that said, "This space is mine." That evening, I opened the windows and aired the house out. The cold came rushing in. It cut through every hallway like truth. I didn't shut it out. I let it breathe. On Wednesday, I drove to the courthouse. Not because I had a legal battle to wage yet, but because I wanted clarity. The county clerk's office was quiet lit, with fluorescent lighting and humming with that particular stillness only bureaucratic spaces hold. I waited patiently until a woman named Doreen called me to her desk. "I'd like to pull all current records on Monroe Residence, 1128 Hawthorne Lane," I said. She nodded, typing with practiced precision. "Are you the title holder?" "Yes." "And are you aware of any recent attempts to modify the deed I am now?" I said. She gave me a look, not nosy, just understanding in a way that required no backstory. I'll print everything, she said gently. "You'll want a certified copy." When I left, I had a folder in my hand and confirmation in black ink. No co-owners, no liens, no pending actions. Just my name, Rachel Monroe. On my drive home, I passed the old community center where I used to volunteer in college tutoring math to kids who hated fractions. One afternoon, I remembered Isabel had shown up unexpectedly. She'd been crying. Her boyfriend at the time had broken things off. I'd left early to comfort her. That was the last time she thanked me for something. Even that thank you came with a, "But you didn't have to. You're always doing the most." I drove past it. No pause, no lingering. When I got home, a car I didn't recognize was in the driveway, a silver sedan, out-of-state plates. I parked behind it. Inside, a man was sitting at my kitchen table, briefcase, open blazer neatly folded over the back of the chair. Dad was standing beside him, arms crossed. I didn't slam the door when I entered. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked in, set my purse down, and said, "Who is this, Dad?" Cleared his throat. "This is Mark Jeffries, an estate consultant. We were just discussing ways to protect family assets." "In my house," I asked, voice flat. Mark stood up awkwardly, extending his hand. "Ms. Monroe, pleasure." I didn't take it. Mark was explaining how certain properties, especially ones bought with family support, can be redistributed through trust structures, Dad continued. My eyes never left Mark. Did he explain that I purchased this house independently, that no such support appears on any ledger? Dad flinched. Just slightly. I turned to Mark. "You'll want to leave now." He looked at Dad, then at me, then quietly packed his briefcase and left. I watched from the window as he reversed carefully down the driveway, avoiding the rake I'd leaned against the mailbox that morning. When I turned back around, Dad hadn't moved. "I'm trying to secure our future," he said. "No," I replied. "You're trying to reassign credit." "You think this is about credit? I think it always has been." His face hardened. "You've always needed to make a point, and you've always needed to erase mine." Silence. Not the heavy, painful kind, the cold, still kind. Then he said it. "You're not making this easy." I almost laughed. "That's the first honest thing you've said since you stepped into this house." He left a moment later. No goodbyes, no hand on my shoulder, just the sound of dress shoes on hardwood and the click of a door shutting behind him. That night I left the porch light off, let them sit with the dark. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. No alarm, just instinct. I brewed coffee and sat by the window. The frost had crept in overnight, tracing spider webs across the edges of the glass. Everything looked still, suspended in quiet. A delivery van pulled up just as the sun began to rise. The driver knocked once, handed me a slim envelope, and left. It was from the law offices of Kelman and Ridge. Inside, a formal offer to purchase the property at current market value with a generous bonus for early acceptance. No sender listed. But I knew. There was no rage in me anymore, just confirmation. They were escalating. They thought I would break. Instead, I folded the letter and slid it under the same fridge magnet that used to hold childhood drawings, a place of trophies. Let it sit there visible. I didn't call anyone, but I did bake. That evening, the smell of cornbread filled the kitchen. I set an extra place at the table, not for them, but for me. For the version of me that had once waited by doors that never opened. She deserved a seat. As I poured soup into a bowl, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't flinch. It was my Uncle Howard, gray-haired, soft-spoken, and someone who had always kept a deliberate distance from family politics. "I was in the area," he said, "saw something that made me stop." He handed me a photo. Old. Worn. It was of my grandmother standing in front of the same house, this house holding a set of keys. "She left it to you for a reason," he said, "not to stir trouble, to protect a legacy." I blinked, unsure if I was more surprised by his words or his timing. "I thought you sided with them." "I don't side," he said simply. "I watch, and sometimes I remember." He didn't stay long, but as he left, he looked back and said, "When they can't control the narrative, they attack the narrator. Don't let them." That night I placed the photo on the mantel, next to the certified deed, next to the list I'd written of everything I'd done to get here. No frames, no glass, just paper exposed and real. When I turned out the lights, the room didn't feel empty, it felt grounded, and for the first time in days, I slept through the night without dreaming. The following week I received an invitation in the mail. Thick cream cardstock, gold trim. Elegant. "You are cordially invited to the Monroe family winter dinner." Location: Isabel and Garrett's new home. Date: December 22nd. Dress code: formal. There was no mention of me hosting, no note acknowledging the change. No explanation, just a clean, decisive erasure wrapped in foil script and sealed with wax. I stared at the envelope for a long time before setting it beside the others. Dad's attempts, Isabel's onesie, the offer letter, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't agreed to solve. Still, I circled the date on my calendar, not to attend, to be ready. The next day, Lena called. "I ran that name you gave me," she said. "Mark Jeffries, the consultant." "Not quite," she said. "He's not licensed in this state. He has a record of predatory estate restructuring, usually targeting single-title homeowners, usually women. I let the information settle like dust on a long, unopened book. "Do you want to pursue it legally?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I want it documented. Already is." And Rachel, "Yeah, don't wait too long. Paperwork has power, but presence, that's what echoes." She was right. So that Friday I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I walked into the local branch of my bank. Not to complain, not to escalate, to request a copy of the notarized title in person with a certified stamp. The teller, a young man named Elliot, squinted at the screen. "You already have full ownership on file," he said. "I know," I replied, "but I'd like a fresh copy, and I want it stamped with today's date." He nodded. "Understood." 10 minutes later, I walked out with a new copy of the deed. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like armor. On my way out, I passed a woman with her toddler on her hip, trying to balance a stroller, a purse, and a phone call all at once. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled, tired but genuine, and for some reason, I smiled back. It reminded me why I'd held on not just to the house but to the principle, because women like us weren't handed things. We carved space and then got questioned for occupying it. That night I updated my will, not out of fear, out of clarity. That weekend I started cleaning the house, not for guests, not out of habit, for clarity. I pulled open closets, emptied drawers, scrubbed baseboards, the quiet, repetitive work that clears more than just dust. I found an old box tucked behind the hallway cabinet. Inside, faded receipts, photos, and a small sealed letter. It was from Grandma, addressed to me. My breath caught. The envelope was yellowed edges, brittle, but the handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, and slanted the same style she used to label mason jars in her pantry. I opened it carefully, heart thudding in a rhythm that didn't match the stillness around me. "Rachel, if you're reading this, then you've probably come across the papers I left behind. I never told your parents what I was doing when I rewrote my will. I knew they wouldn't agree, but this house, this space, was meant for someone who'd honor it, someone who saw value without needing approval. That someone is you. Hold your ground. With love, Grandma June." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back and slid it into the same drawer that held the notarized deed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. On Monday, the phone rang again. It was Garrett, Isabel's husband. His voice was tight, forced, casual. "Hey, Rachel, just a heads up, we're doing a little presentation during the winter dinner. Some kind of family slideshow thing, Dad's idea." "Okay," I said. "So, if you have any old photos, especially of your grandma, feel free to bring them." I almost asked if they wanted the letter too, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'll think about it." "Cool, cool." "Oh, and bring a dish if you want. You know how Mom gets with portions." I hung up shortly after. Outside, it had started snowing early for the season, but not unwelcome. I stood at the window and watched the flakes fall, soft but steady. A memory surfaced me, about 8 years old, standing at this same window. Grandma had wrapped me in a blanket, whispering stories about how the snow was nature's way of wiping things clean. Now the snow didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like confirmation. The ground was being cleared, and something new, something earned, was settling in. That Wednesday, I took the letter to Lena. She read it slowly, fingers brushing the creases with care. "Do they know about this?" she asked. "No," I said, "and I don't plan to tell them until I have to." Lena nodded. "You don't need to weaponize it. But it does change the air in the room. It already has." I didn't need a courtroom. I didn't need a microphone. What I had was weight, quiet, undeniable. That night, I opened the guest room closet again, this time not to clean or confront anything, just to look. I rearranged a few things, moved the untouched blanket box, smoothed the comforter, dusted the empty shelves. I wasn't preparing for guests. I was reclaiming space. The next morning, I received an email from my bank confirming that the house's ownership had been re-verified and locked from all outside edits without in-person notarized approval. It was a simple message, 2 paragraphs, but it felt like thunder. At noon, a small package arrived. No return address. Inside a picture frame with a photo of Grandma June and me taken at the old orchard. I hadn't seen it in years. Taped to the back was a sticky note. "She chose you. I see it now. H. Howard." He hadn't spoken much at the last holiday dinner, but he had been watching, remembering, and now acknowledging. It didn't need to be public yet. The reckoning was building, not bursting. I placed the frame next to Grandma's letter. No words, just presence. Then I sat in the living room and turned on the fireplace, not because it was cold, but because the room deserved warmth again. As the flames flickered, my phone lit up. A group text. From Mom. "Looking forward to seeing everyone next week. Don't forget to RSVP to Isabel." No mention of my name directly, but that didn't matter anymore. I responded with a simple, "Received." That was enough. Let them wonder what that meant. Let them prepare for a version of me they hadn't bothered to know. December 22nd came with gray skies and a steady drizzle. Not quite rain, not quite snow, just cold and heavy. The kind of weather that didn't demand attention, but shifted the weight of the world onto your shoulders anyway. I pulled into Isabel's driveway right at 6 o'clock. The house, larger than mine, newer, was already glowing with soft yellow lights and wreaths on every window. A statement, not a welcome. I sat in the car for a moment before stepping out. No butterflies, no dread, just clarity. Inside, the noise hit me immediately. Laughter, clinking glasses, the faint hum of holiday jazz floating under it all. Isabel spotted me first. "Rachel, you made it." She came in for a hug that never quite touched. "You look polished," she said, eyes flicking over my outfit. Simple black dress, clean lines, nothing loud. "Thanks," I said, taking off my coat and scanning the room. There was a slideshow projector already running in the living room, family pictures flipping slowly over the wall. Dad in college, Isabel at prom, family trips, Easter Sundays. I wasn't in many of them. Wine, Isabel offered. Sure. I took the glass, not sipping, just holding. Then I saw him. Mr. Landon, my bank officer. The one who signed off on the loan, who notarized my documents, who processed the title re-verification last week. He was standing by the fireplace chatting with Uncle Howard. Our eyes met. He smiled, cordial, not intrusive. I didn't invite him, but someone had. Across the room, I saw Dad speaking to a group of neighbors. Isabel's husband was fiddling with a laptop near the projector. Mom was arranging desserts like it was the royal wedding. I walked quietly through the room, unnoticed, until I wasn't. Dad raised his glass, tapping a fork gently against it. The chatter softened into silence. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. "It's not often we all get together like this, and the Monroe family has a long tradition of," he paused, "legacy and togetherness." My jaw tightened. Tonight's a chance to celebrate that, and to recognize the strength of family values, home respect support. Then he nodded to Garrett, who hit the space bar. The slideshow began again from the top. Photos flicked across the screen. But this time, something was different. A new image appeared. Me. Standing in front of my house holding a sold sign. Then another me painting the porch, sweating through a summer afternoon. Another me at the closing table, shaking hands with Mr. Landon. A hush fell over the room. The air shifted. People turned their heads not with dramatic gasps, but with those small, precise glances that meant something had tilted off script. The next photo showed the deed signed and sealed. Another a scan of the loan approval, my name printed clean and clear. And then, the final slide. A simple image. Grandma June standing in front of the house, this same house holding a set of keys, the same keys I now carried in my bag. There was no music, no narration, just silence. Then a new voice, low and composed, cut through it. I thought it was important we all see the full story, Mr. Landon said from near the fireplace. Rachel didn't ask me to speak, but I've worked with her through the entire home process. There were no co-signers, no transfers, no assistants, just one name on every document. Hers. He looked over at me. No dramatics, no bowing, just truth spoken aloud. My father's mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Garrett looked panicked, like a tech guy whose system had just rebooted without warning, and Isabel stood frozen eyes flicking between the screen and her wine glass as if willing herself to disappear into it. No one moved, until Uncle Howard stepped forward, clearing his throat. This, he said, gesturing to the slideshow, is what legacy looks like. Not just bloodlines or dinner parties, but work. Quiet, steady work. He turned to me. And Rachel has done it all. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. It was the kind of moment that doesn't need amplification, like snow falling in church, like a room exhaling all at once. I didn't cry. I didn't bow my head. I just stood there. One hand resting lightly on the back of the dining chair, the other still holding that untouched glass of wine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like the room had shifted toward me. Or maybe I had simply stopped trying to shift toward it. Either way, I wasn't on the edge anymore. Mom was the first to break the silence. She stepped forward with a smile that was more rehearsed than real, her tone light and clipped. Well, that was quite the surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Landon." She turned to me, voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to, I didn't," I said, meeting her gaze. "He did." She blinked. Once, twice, but said nothing more. Garrett mumbled something about technical issues and scrambled to switch off the projector, but the damage, or perhaps the clarity, was already done. The guests slowly began to murmur again, their conversations low and cautious. A few nodded at me in passing. Some looked away, but I noticed two women near the dessert table whispering to each other while looking directly at me, then subtly raising their glasses. It wasn't grand, but it was public, and it was enough. Uncle Howard walked over and gently clinked his glass against mine. "You didn't have to speak," I said. "I wasn't speaking for you," he replied. "I was speaking for her." He nodded toward the photo of Grandma June still paused on the screen. "I just wish she'd been here." "She is." We stood there in quiet for a moment. Across the room, Dad was sitting now, elbows on his knees, fingers laced in front of his mouth. I could tell he was trying to frame it, rewrite it somehow in his mind, control the narrative again, but this time there was nothing left to say. I set my wine glass down untouched and slowly walked toward the exit. No coat yet, no hurry, just movement. A woman I didn't recognize stopped me near the hallway. "You're June's granddaughter, right?" I nodded. She was my neighbor back in the day, used to bring my mom soup when she was sick. That house meant something to her. She always said it should go to someone with hands that built, not just mouths that spoke. Her words settled into me like warm water into cracked stone. "Thank you," I said softly. She touched my arm and moved on. As I reached the front door, Isabel caught up. "Rachel, wait." I paused. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, her eyes darting to the living room and back again. I didn't know she finally said, "You didn't ask. I just thought, you were always so quiet about everything." I smiled, but not unkindly. "And you were always loud enough for both of us." She lowered her gaze. "I didn't mean to, I know. And that was all. No forgiveness. No venom. Just air between us, open and clean." I opened the door and the winter air rushed in, brisk and unfiltered. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, I heard someone behind me call my name, faint, unsure. But I didn't stop. The wind brushed across my face. The sky above was clear now. Moonlight cast sharp outlines along the sidewalk. My car was parked where I'd left it, quiet and waiting. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door gently, and sat still for a beat. Inside, the party would resume. People would fill the space with noise and dessert and deflections, but the air had already shifted, and they would feel it. Not because I yelled, not because I demanded anything, but because I showed up and stood still. The morning after the dinner, the world was quiet. Snow had fallen overnight, not enough to trap anyone, but just enough to hush the streets. My front yard looked like someone had covered it with a fresh cotton sheet, smooth and untouched. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of tea still in my robe, watching the light make slow progress across the porch steps. No texts from my parents, no calls from Isabel. The group thread had gone silent. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like stillness, like the air itself had stopped holding its breath. I sat at the dining table, the one Grandma had kept in this very spot. The light hit the wood just right now, revealing little scratches and faded rings, marks of use of living. On the sideboard, I had arranged a small cluster, the photo from the orchard, the letter in its frame, and a small silver key Grandma used to wear on a chain. I never knew why she kept it, but I found it last week tucked into a button tin. No lock matched it. Maybe that was the point. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived, handwritten. No return address. It was from Dad. Short. 5 lines. Rachel, you made your point clear. Loud without raising your voice. Your grandmother would have been proud. Let us know if you want to talk. Dad. There was no apology. But that didn't surprise me. What mattered was in the phrasing. You made your point clear. Not you embarrassed us. Not you overstepped. Just acknowledgement. It didn't sting. It didn't soothe. It just landed soft and final. I set the letter down beside my tea, stared at the words for a while, and then folded it neatly into a drawer. No rush to respond. That night, I lit the fireplace again. Not out of habit this time, but as ritual. I sat on the rug legs, curled beneath me, wrapped in a wool shawl Grandma once crocheted for herself. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The next few days passed like pages turning themselves. I went about my routines, grocery runs, emails, replacing a leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. It was almost eerie how normal it all felt. But beneath that normalcy, something fundamental had shifted. Not around me, in me. A neighbor dropped off a tin of cookies and asked how my holidays were going. I smiled and said, peaceful, and it was the most honest answer I'd given in years. On Christmas Eve, I received a second letter, this one from Howard, typed, thoughtful. Rachel, I should have said it sooner, but I'll say it now. I saw how they spoke to you, how they looked past you, how they framed the story around someone else always. You didn't push back with noise. You just stood still long enough for the truth to speak louder. That's something rare. Grandma June had it too. If you ever need anything, advice, a notary, or someone to sit beside you in a quiet room, I'm here. You're not alone anymore. Howard. I folded the letter and placed it with the others, tucking them into a cloth-bound notebook where I'd begun jotting pieces of my story, not for publishing, not for proof, just for me. The notebook didn't open with a scream. It started with a list. Things I carried alone. The house paperwork, the memory of that last hospital visit, my grandmother's quiet nod in the hallway, the way Mom turned to Isabel at every decision, the key no one remembered but me. And underneath that, things I don't carry anymore, the need to explain, the need to be invited, the need to prove I belonged. There's a freedom in not chasing seats at tables where silence was the price of admission. Grandma used to say if they only listen when you shout, they were never really listening. She was right. They heard me now, not because I raised my voice, but because I stopped lowering it. I baked cookies the next day, not for gifting, not for guests, just because I felt like it, because I could. I played old jazz records while cleaning out the last few drawers in the hallway, ones filled with receipts and notes in Grandma's handwriting. Most were mundane lists of jam ingredients, reminders to buy batteries, birthday dates scribbled in the margins. But one note stopped me. It was folded inside a box of mason jar lids. Keep the house warm, even when they try to make it cold. No name, no context, but I knew whose handwriting it was. That night, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't for show. It was just light for me. I curled up on the couch with a book I hadn't finished in years. The silence didn't press in like it used to. It wrapped around me gently the way a familiar blanket does after a long day. Somewhere around midnight, I received one more message. From Isabel. I understand if you don't want to hear from me. I was wrong about a lot of things. I didn't see you. I only saw the version of you they told me to. But I see it now. If there's ever room for it, I'd like to know the you I missed. I stared at the screen for a long while. Then I locked my phone and set it face down on the coffee table. Forgiveness doesn't always need a reply. Sometimes it just needs space. A few days later on New Year's Eve, I stood outside under the cold sky wrapped in Grandma's shawl, watching distant fireworks ripple on the horizon. No countdown, no noise, just a deep breath and a slow exhale. I wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. I wasn't wondering why I hadn't been called or what I'd missed. For once, I wasn't missing anything at all. I stepped back inside, closed the door gently behind me, and turned the lock with a soft click. Not out of fear, out of peace. As I walked through the hallway, the faint smell of the cookies still lingered, the warmth of the fireplace holding steady. I paused in front of the mirror in the foyer, not to check my reflection, just to see myself fully. I looked older than I remembered, not in a tired way, but in a rooted way, like someone who had finally planted both feet on her own ground. I turned off the last light and headed upstairs. The guest room, once filled with old tension, now held quiet, and I let it stay that way. I didn't need loud victories. I didn't need centerpieces or toasts or applause. My triumph came in stillness, in every quiet step, in every closed door that didn't sting. I wasn't the girl they forgot to save a seat for anymore. I was the woman who didn't need one, and somehow that said more than any speech ever could. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand a seat. And still, when the moment came, the room turned toward her, not because she asked, but because they finally saw what had always been there. Some stories aren't told in fireworks. They're written in the quiet decision to stay standing even when no one saves you a chair. And sometimes the softest step away echoes the loudest.